Hello, everyone. Welcome to Progressive HR Live. This is our season 3 year-end roundup, and we've got a great show for you today. So, if favorite or most interesting trend for 2024 for HR and people operations. So, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Geeta Kulkarni. She is the the humor coach and principal with the Humor Edge. How are you doing today, Geeta?
Doing good. Thanks for having me again, Corinne. It's good to see you and good to see everyone else too. So I think this has come up a little bit because we forget to use all the power that we have on a daily basis. So I'm doing a lot of what I call like pulse points and reminding people of using humor and activating it into their workplace. So um, I think it's because, and I will say, I think a lot of this is happening because we are getting a lot more things on our plates. Everybody is, and this is just me observing and kind of taking empirically what I'm hearing from our client base. But I think the American workplace in general, we're seeing a lot of things happening. One is the advent of AI, people getting nervous about that, the notion of just workplace isolationism, if you will. That's happening. And I think that's moving people into a place where they don't feel that necessarily that community and that connection. And so what we're finding is that what I'm finding is that a lot of human resource teams are finding the need to actually build team building and make that something that's not just event based once a year, but something that they're doing, they're actually mature, they're manicuring and they're injecting it on a regular quarterly basis, sometimes once every other month with their teams to kind of foster those relations. I think that's just I think it's coming because the volume of work is there and people just get so overrun by doing the work that sometimes some of that soft stuff gets marginalized because they're having to do the hard stuff, right? So things that I did is I started with a lot of women and giving them a karyotype as to what their humor style is, whether it's like a Kelly Ripa or a Tina Fey or an Aubrey Plaza, and what played well with them. And they loved it. People latched around that. And now I'm getting a lot of men who are like, can you do the same thing in the spirit of men? I want a rubric for men for humor. It's fascinating. So I don't know.
So before we go on to my next question, I wanted to introduce the other HR leaders who are joining us. So we have my co-host, Kristen Strunk. She is also the content lead for Progressive HR Live and the People and Culture Director with Manpower. And then we have Megan Bickle, who is Megan, this is a mouthful, but Head of Talent Development, Organizational Effectiveness, and Employee Listening with Amplitude. And then Marty Robbins, who is the founder of Vibe HR. So welcome, everybody. And also, what is your favorite trend? And if you haven't answered those already, I know that when I asked you the first question, there was a lot put in there. So what's your favorite trend? I'm assuming it's humor. But then also, what's on your plate for 2024?
Yeah. I think that the male rubric for humor is on my plate. So for for the men out there who are like, how do I practically use humor to kind of advance my workplace agenda, right? That's a big piece of work that I'm developing. And then another piece that I am developing is just kind of working with HR teams to kind of give different slants and prisms to how to use humor in their work. I think that's a fascinating area. People are like, yeah, humor is needed, but I'm getting pretty deep on developing with companies, just developing curriculum. Like, how do I show up with humor when it comes to being a project manager? How do I show up with humor when I need to persuade the crowd to follow an idea? How do I use humor if I'm a developer in computer software? How do I use humor so that's a fascinating area. Those are kind of the two big areas where I'm going to be spending a lot of time because they're finding that we're needing to develop curriculum that's really specific to sometimes a particular role and some of the things that people are doing in their role. So
thanks, Geeta. And I know you have to leave a little bit early.
Yes.
So everyone, if Geeta pops off early, then just no worries. She's got to get onto a meeting. So with that, thanks, Marnie. Kristen and I are going to volley back and forth between introducing guests and asking questions. So with that, on to you, Kristen.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So I get to introduce Megan Bickle. Megan, I am thrilled to be able to have this conversation with you based on your role and the places that you have been in 2023. So I'm curious about what are some of the things that you've taken away from 2023 and what are you looking forward to most in 2024?
Wow. What am I looking forward to most? A new year. 2023 has been a whirlwind. So I recently joined Amplitude, and to Corinne's point, if anyone has a fun acronym to describe all of the pieces of work that I support, I'm all ears. Because yes, talent development, org effectiveness, listening, yeah, it is a mouthful. But it's been really fun joining Amplitude and really getting to wrap my arms around all of these pieces of work and really start to look at how do we evolve? Where do we leapfrog? How do you integrate all of these pieces? And then thinking about it through the lens of the leader, the learner, that user experience of how to ensure that, to all of them, these pieces have natural cohesion. So it doesn't feel like, okay, so once a year I do a performance review, and then once a year I have a career conversation. It's helping teach that cadence and evolution, and hoping that employees feel that impact. So super excited about that work opportunity with Amplitude.
So is that a trend that you see going forward, the opportunity to have those ongoing conversations rather than those one time a year conversations? Have you seen that as a building trend in human resources?
Yes. And I honestly wish like more we're looking at it through the lens of integration. Because I think sometimes it's really easy to get stuck in our silos. And depending on the size of the company, it depends on how is it structured. I've worked in some companies where performance management might be its own COE, versus leadership development, versus where the company might have it all bucketed as one. And I think when it's bucketed all as one, it really teaches you and forces you to kind of zoom in and out and look at things holistically, but then also through that perspective of, well, what's the natural rhythm? What's the cohesion? How do you connect the dots for your employees, for the
Mhm.
company? How do you make it make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense in terms of those regular conversations. And so as you get settled into your new role and continue to be visible in the HR leadership space, what are some of the things that you're planning either from a professional standpoint or a personal standpoint in 2024?
I'm definitely excited about this transformation or reinvention in talent development and learning and development. I look at this through the lens of what's going on with AI and HR and how it's really creating this opportunity specific for leadership development, learning and development, skills-based strategies, how to bust out of what we've always done or what we've always known, or this notion of like order takers, and
Mm,
how do we connect the dots of the ROI, this program that we launched, to really how do we look at this as a strategic element of enabling and empowering employees and leaders in order to achieve business goals, and not just traditional learning and development programs where maybe we bring people together for a couple times a year and teach them some things, but
mhm.
really what are those things that people need to know how to do now or tomorrow? Like, how are we looking at things proactively and in leveraging insights? So, for example, insights out of the engagement survey, right? Like, how is talent development looking at that and looking at trends and themes and unpacking things and then creating experiences or content or playbooks to help support that versus waiting for a leader to reach out and say, I got my engagement survey scores and I have an opportunity around creating a sense of belonging. Can you help me? So I really see, that particular field, like the opportunity to leapfrog and be a strategic partner. So really excited to help that work both at Amplitude, but also to be a larger voice in talent development.
So as you think about using those things in talent development going into 2024, if you had one piece of advice to give the HR professionals on this call, what would it be?
Only one.
We might come back to you, but right now we're going to dish it out in little bits and pieces.
Well, I like Gita's comment around 2024 might be a theme of the integrated experience. In a previous role, I had the word integrated in my title, and my leader at the time joked. She's like, I kind of want to just tattoo this on you around like you always need to think of how to connect the dots and connect the pieces. So I think building on that, like my advice, my one piece of advice is to always like connect the dots, both for yourself, but also tie that into your marketing of helping others connect the dots. So integrate, integrate, integrate.
I love it. I love it. Thank you so much for that, Megan. Corinne, back to you.
Yeah, so I think we have a few minutes to kind of have a little group discussion here about integration and connecting the dots, as Megan and Gita actually brought it up. So Marnie or Sudha, welcome, Sudha. Any like thoughts around what Megan just said?
Marnie, you go ahead. I just jumped in earlier than my slot because I wanted to hear all you incredible women speak before I did. So you go ahead, Marnie, and then I wanted to make a comment on what Gita talked about earlier.
Thanks, Sudha. I think both Megan and Gita hit the nail on the head. It's really hard to move on from that and actually sound profound with anything. But I will say, doubling down on the AI piece with the, how do we continue the human piece of our work? I mean, we do everything. So continuing the human piece and then getting out of the way of the technology, but not losing having the technology go off the rails, so to speak. So how do we keep that human-centeredness, the employer brand, things like that, while harnessing technology to help us build at scale? So that integration piece, connecting the dots, I think not only includes connecting the dots of all the functional pieces, but connecting the dots of technology versus human interaction versus messaging and storytelling. So that to me is that ecosystem that we're going to be playing with.
100%. And how it all ties together. And Geeta, you kicked us off by talking about obviously humor at work, which is humor in life is so incredibly important to all of our well-being. But what I find, and I'm sure we all find this as HR professionals and leaders, that there is an emotional labor that people in HR take on that nobody sees. We see it, we feel it, we felt it throughout our careers. We know our teams feel it. They felt it during the pandemic. They're still feeling it. And as we talk about AI coming forward and all the change that goes on in an organization, and we lead the change management exercises for the company, there is an emotional labor that takes over for us. Nobody sees that, hey, I need to talk to someone conversation that your HR business partner has taken or their best friend in HR takes for them that helps guide the organization. Mm-hmm. And, while they're also navigating their own careers, we forget as HR employees, we are still employees of an organization, right? And so that HR for HR and that taking care of each other, of the emotional labor that we all put through, I think is really critical, as we, again, help navigate the business. So that's through humor, that's through empathy. And we know there's no really good humor without empathy. Otherwise, we're just making fun of each other, and that's not nice, But, we have to have all of that together. And I think that sometimes get lost.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I've been out of corporate HR. So I've been a fractional corporate HR until about 2014. So you can say that I've been out of corporate HR for almost 10 years. And I still do feel that emotional drain, that emotional burnout. And not just because I'm empathetic or sympathetic to my friends. It's just, I feel it too, just everything going around. So, I think 100% HR for HR, big trend that's going into 2024. So with that, I am going to introduce Marnie Robbins, founder of Vibe HRC. How are you, Marnie? And what have you been doing since our live, which is over a year ago?
Yeah, that's what I was like, oh, wait, how long ago has it been? Well, okay. last time we spoke on Progressive HR Live was I was employed. You know, I was a corporate head of people and going through that world. And so since then, I've opened up Vibe, and at Vibe, I am really leaning into employee relations, you know, culture coaching, consulting, etc. And one of the things that's happened over the years, I opened that up, and I think we all know how many hats we wear as, you know, HR officers and head of people. And so what I've done is really try to figure out, okay, but what is the problem statement that people really need from me at this time? And so some really neat things that have come up are like, I have the vibe check now, because companies are like, we've either gone through change management or a layoff. Now I need to understand, you know, what is going to engage and get our team performing. And so coming up with the vibe check, which is essentially a listening and employee engagement process, and coming up with a game plan and playbook together. So there's a lot of different services that are bubbling up to the surface, just based on conversations with the HR community at large, based on conversations with founders and CFOs and CEOs, and really understanding, you know, what it is that are keeping them up at night. So it's been fun. You know, having a ton of fun with Vibe.
So almost two years now. And so going into 2024, what's new? What's like on your list?
Workshops, you know, and speaking gigs. I think you're going to see a lot of, you know, in-person events, you know, from me. I got a little taste at Disrupt HR in Austin a couple weeks ago. Ton of fun and awesome people. Like, just learned so much from the rest of the speakers and the crew there. And so I think you'll be seeing that quite a bit more. We also be seeing workshops specifically around intentional design around culture and engagement, and what listening tours look like, engagement around, you know, leadership teams and how they're establishing meaningful relationships. You know, how do we go through conversations, or how do we mend our relationships when things go wrong? And so those are the things that we're going to be looking into for 2024. And bye, Gita.
Hi, Gita. Hands on it. What is your fave trend or you're most interested in for 2024?
Yeah, I think you can't escape it, right? It's the AI, you know, piece of it. And the way that I'm looking at the AI trend as of right now is the movement from experimentation in AI to operationalizing that AI into the workplace. So we had a ton of fun in 2023 of saying, okay, how do we use Chat GPT, throw some, you know, performance feedback questions or some employee communications in there to see what pops up and really enhance that area of the business. But I think moving into 2024, you're going to see a lot of HR teams focusing in on, okay, what technology is out there that maybe has more proprietary AI data science that's embedded in that, being able to control that input and the output. Like, what does that mean for my organization? How is it actually working within the flow of our business outside of experimentation? And then beyond that, what does that mean for our people strategy? You know, what does our brand voice look like in conjunction with AI? What does our culture, you know, look like? What integrity do we need to establish? What are our brand guidelines that we need to establish within the use of that AI? And are we keeping our central core message? And so I think there's not only operationalizing it, but a lot of due diligence that's going to be added to that, which means a lot of training and a lot of curiosity and a lot of, just a lot of intense research that goes more from the, you know, I'm going to dabble in this from a personal skill standpoint to, no, this is a strategic lever that we need to focus in on in 2024.
And you and I had that long phone conversation about this.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I wanted to bring up is that if I love LinkedIn, but you know, they don't always get it right. So in their big ideas for 2024, they said that the hype off of Gen AI will die down in 2024. And I 100%, 1000% disagree with that. I think, to your point, we've just got so much more to be curious about. And there's levels of curiosity too. Like we've got people like Tim Whitley and Alex Kuchev and Laz Rindum, and that are just like on the cutting edge of everything, and they've got everything that's new, and they're like deep into it. And then we have ourselves, and we're just really working with the use cases for HR. And then we have other executives that are like ChatGPT. Oh yeah, I've heard of that. And there's some people that haven't even heard of it yet. So no, it's not going down in 2024. What do you guys think about that?
No, I absolutely agree.
Yeah.
I don't think the use of that is going to decrease. And as we get more skilled, and I think Marnie brought up a really good point, that there's going to be all of these things that organizations need to think about how they use it. And unfortunately, I think some of us are not going to know that we have to think about that until we stumble into something, right? And it's going to cause somebody to go, wait a second, we probably need to ... And so I think there's going to be a ton of learning that we're going to take away. And I think from a conversation standpoint, communities like this, where we can share hey, here's what I tripped on when I did this, you probably want to watch out for that, or it's going to be really helpful for those of us just getting into it.
Yeah, I think it's important for HR professionals to ensure that they're in the conversation and at the table as they talk with the leadership teams of what this impact will be on the organization. Again, we're going to lead the change efforts, right? We're always ahead of that. And if we're not in the conversation, then decisions will be made without our knowledge. And that's never a good thing, right? So we have to have input because it is a strategic decision for the organization. Regardless of what business you're in, Gen AI is going to affect everyone's business. Whether it's controlling labor costs, whether it's how we work differently. I'm not a fan of any kind of Gen AI replacing a person by any means. I think it's important to use the technology to be more efficient, so you can work on the stuff that you really want to work on. Like that admin is stuff that an AI bot can do. Let it do it, and then so we can focus on the strategic stuff. So learn it to use it to your advantage and be in that conversation, I think, is critical.
Megan, did you want to add anything with that before we go on to introducing Sudha and her thoughts?
Yeah, I think just to double click, it really highlights the importance of having conversations like this, the authenticity around, Kristen's statement around, here's what I tripped over, or just being able to talk. It's one thing that I love about HR. None of this is proprietary information or the secret sauce. We are able to have conversations like this and talk about, hey, here's what we're doing for high potential development or a mentorship program. What are you doing, or what would you advise? And so it really just ties to the importance of community, so we can all continue to learn together.
Thanks, Megan.
Amen.
Amen. Yeah. Bye, Marnie. Marnie. And now we were 6. So, okay, Kristen, over to you.
So I would like to introduce Sudha. Sudha is the CHRO of TerraNet and has been extremely involved and engaged with the HR community. And so,
here at work, we have some unionized workforces in our employment across Canada. So we've been dealing with labor negotiations that have landed well this year and going into some new ones next year. So the mood, I think, in North America or even globally with the unionized workforce, I think, has changed in the last couple of years. So working towards that, we've also launched a 3-year organizational strategy, which we presented to the organization. So a lot of work went into that. And I'm proud to say that, again, as the HR leader at the table, influencing, helping to direct that strategy and develop that strategy. So having that seat at the table is so critical. And I know everyone knows that, but it's so great, when you have it and you can help cascade that strategy throughout the organization.
Yeah, no, and I think you called out a couple of really interesting things. And to your earlier comment about the emotional heavy lifting that happens in the HR space, and then the personal things that we go through that we have to figure out a way to handle as we are helping others handle either their personal changes or the things that are going on in their personal lives. I think we come back to this sense of community, like Megan mentioned, where we do have the opportunity to help each other and support each other. And then the other to be really around that strategic vision of the organization. And so I'm curious, as you're sitting at the table and you're thinking about that 3-year strategic vision, what are some of the things you're calling out specifically to your business leaders that they might not have thought about from a human resources trend, or some things that they might need to be aware of?
So look, regardless of what business you're in, everything happens through people, right? So whatever your business strategy is, your talent strategy has to tie right into that. So, and every leader has an HR component to their job, right? They're not HR experts, but they do have an HR component. So what I'm bringing to them is, I'm going to use the word gaps, but that sounds bad. They're not gaps. They're feeders into the strategy. So if this is what we're going to do we have the talent to do it? And are we going to grow that talent? Are you going to grow or are you going to buy? There's got to be a combination, right? So whether you're growing or whether you're buying, how does that tie into our DEI and B strategy? Because, that is part of our culture as well. So keeping all of that in mind, and our talent strategy, what skill gaps do we have? What does workforce planning look like? We have generations of employees in our organization. Some are going to retire soon. Lucky them, they're going to retire soon. So have we built that knowledge within? Because we have folks that have been here that have tribal knowledge, because they've been here for so long, and that's not written in a how-to-do book. So it's filling in those gaps of succession, workforce planning, and tying it into our D&I strategy for the organization. That is what we talk about with the talent strategy.
That's amazing, and connecting. And again, we're back to the integration.
It's all integration, right? Integration. Yep. Yeah, it's all integration.
We keep coming back. We keep coming back.
Yeah.
So as you think about those things in 2024, what are some of the things that you're really excited about for the human resources function in 2024?
So developing the leaders on how they're engaging, how they're connecting with their employees, that's going to be our big double down this year, because at the end of the day, they're the ones accountable for the people of this organization and what they're bringing forward. And so we've got a lot of great people here. We want to keep them. We want to make sure that they're engaged, they can be their best selves and their true selves at work. And that means developing leaders so they can create the psychological safe space for people to thrive. And I know that sounds like, oh, isn't everybody doing that? And I think we all are. But I think in difficult times, it's getting back to the basics, which is really solid leadership and people management.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to summarize it. And I'm curious, Mindy and Russell and Megan and Corinne, when you think about the conversation around getting back to the basics, sometimes we do get distracted by some of those really great things. So what are some of the basics that you would additionally recommend that we get back to?
New hire onboarding. I was just having this conversation yesterday. Selfishly, I get to redesign it at Amplitude next year, which I'm so excited about. And I was having the conversation of, talent acquisition spends a lot of time and money to woo candidates. Come join us. We're great. You'll love it here. And then what do? Usually day 1 or day 2, it's death by PowerPoint in remote first experience, talking about here's your benefits, here's your IT security training, like all that stuff. And then we just kind of dump them into the work versus how can we hold their hand and still continue to foster that sense of excitement? Because as we know, during those first, couple months, employees are still kind of assessing, like, did I make the right decision? Right? It's like dating. You said yes, like, okay, I guess we're going steady. Are they still putting on a nice shirt, or did we move to like the sloppy phase? So I think that's a key area that often gets forgotten about or gets put to the back of the burner. So really tying to a company's strategy around what does their forecasting look like for hiring new employees and rethinking, amid new ways of working, like what is that experience when somebody first joins us?
You know what, Megan, it's so true what you're saying, because, as the employer, we're on probation too, right? We think about the employee coming in and their typical 3-month probation. So are we. So, we've had all of this effort into recruiting the perfect candidate. So let's give them the best experience as well, and make sure that, because they're testing us too. Right.
Right. They're deciding, like, do I like it here? Should I go back to where I came? Or did I get bamboozled during the interview process?
Yeah. Great point.
I think tying off of that, some of the basics is also just about communication and alignment. And how are we communicating the strategic vision and making sure, do we actually have one? And have we articulated that really well beyond our leadership team down to the individual contributor? Do they understand how they're bringing value every day? Do they understand what are the expectations for me and what does success look like? And being able to feel that they're a part of something greater. And then how are we making sure that we're all in the same boat and that we're all using the right tools at the right time to be able to row in the same direction towards that strategic vision? I think that level of alignment and healthy communication, I think, is one of the basics that I'm seeing that we really need to fine tune and get better at.
Mindy, one of the things that we're doing with our strategic vision that we launched earlier this year, or actually last year, January. So this year still seems like a lifetime ago, but January, is that we've had regular town halls on the progress and the update. And then we do deeper dives with the leadership team. So anyone who's a people manager, and they take that back to their functional town halls and cascade that even further. Like, so how we're tracking and what does it mean to me, frontline employee and others, and how they're enacting the strategy of the organization. So we do that regularly throughout the year. I highly recommend it. It's a great way to get everyone excited, bought in, and know what their role is.
Yes. I think that's so important. And then how are we even speaking to that in our one-on-ones, like on that manager employee level, and like how are we even finessing those one-on-ones and making them quality conversations? It's great.
Yeah. Russell, you wanted to say something? Thanks, Mindy and Sudha.
No, I appreciate the whole conversation. I think that organizations really need to understand their mission, vision, and values, and be able to talk about that in any type of regular, normal conversation. One of the things that I see is that organizations don't really talk about that. Some believe that people understand it, and that folks made a decision to work in the organization because they are aligned with the mission, vision, and values. But I think all parts of the organization need to know why they're there. I think you all have talked about how does one demonstrate their commitment to the organization? How does the organization demonstrate to the employees that they can support their success? And then need to talk about what does that success mean? Organizational success, individual success, are those two things aligned will drive the organization, and it's a fantastic synergy if the organization can do that correctly.
Yeah. For me, back to basics, Marnie and I have talked about this, and I believe I've talked with you all, employee communications, especially around benefits and wellness and with the whole benefits and perks and everything for the whole person. So, basics in the sense of that, employee communications and open enrollment and benefits, but like moving into more of the 2024 aspect is really tailoring it to the whole person and being inclusive. With that, we're going to move on to introducing Russell Davis. So Russell Davis is the Chief People Officer with Revolution Entertainment Services. So Russell, how are you doing? And what have you been doing since we last talked? I think I know.
Yeah. So I'm doing much better. We're really relieved. These the SAG-AFTRA and WGA strikes are the longest in history. And I've been through 3 in the past. So this was just long, and it was pretty devastating all across the board. We all organizations that had a connection to the entertainment industry lost significant staff. We had about a 35% turnover rate for us, and it was pretty devastating. So the downstream effects of what happens to organizations that are connected with the entertainment industry were significant, but we're really happy that the decisions have been made. We're moving forward, and we're looking forward to 2024. So that's my big thing. Looking forward to 2024 and how we can get back to developing our teams and connecting with our clients in the best way possible.
Really, really interested for 2024 trends for NHR.
My trends are all about the supervisor. And I think Sudha had talked about this as well. We need to be engaged in deep, specific, ongoing training for our supervisors so that we can develop leaders, not just people who are in charge of other people who are finishing tasks. So we need to focus on engagement, communication standards, and expectation setting. I think that if we can do that as an organization, we can get back to this human aspect. I've seen kind of three things happening. We went from kind of some programming issues with our organization to COVID-19, just horror. Then we went into the strike. And so we've had 3 or 4 years of just significant impact on the person. And I think it had also been discussed that human resource people are people as well. So we're going through those same traumas. And we need to be able to understand how the impact of everything that's happening in the organization and in the world is impacting us so that we can continue to provide good service. So I think that we need to have our supervisors understand what the organizational expectations are around role modeling positive behavior. Expectation, and I think there are 4 critical areas: expectation setting, organizational culture support, understanding multicultural, multi-generational workplaces, which is folks are having some difficulty with, and communication effectiveness. So people need to understand how to speak with and engage with others. What can I talk about? What can I, there was a conversation earlier about humor in the workplace. I know people are really engaged in humor in the workplace, and I see the negative impacts of that because they're not sure what is appropriate for what group. And especially when we're looking at multi-generational workplaces, there's comments that folks just never make from different groups, and there are comments that folks make all the time from others. And we need to figure out how to normalize that so that folks understand what's okay and what's not. So if we can work on expectation setting, organizational culture support, understanding multi-generational, multicultural workplaces, and help folks develop a communication strategy that is genuine, authentic, and appropriate, I think that we're going to be good in 2024.
You nailed it, Russell. You nailed it.
I hear a lot of empathy and care in there.
Yeah, which we need, which everybody needs, regardless of whether we had a pandemic or not. Everybody needs it. It just brought it all to light how much we were really thirsty and hungry for it. From the pandemic to social justice to all of it, it just brought to the forefront what everyone has been craving for.
Yeah, and
it's hard.
Yeah. And it's across all generations. We like to split all the generations up, and in certain aspects you can split them up, but everybody wants care. Everybody wants attention. Everybody wants to feel that they matter and that they what their work and they value. So
we hear about Gen Zs, we say in Canada, Gen Zs that want flexibility. I'm like, I'm a Gen X. I want flexibility. Like everybody wants flexibility. So some things are generation specific. Some are just human specific. What every human being needs and wants. Yeah.
Absolutely, yes, absolutely. Kristen, did you have more questions for the group?
Yeah, so I'm curious. I'm listening to us kind of talk about that empathy and the human nature of what it is that we do and the work that we support. And I'm wondering how we help our organizations see that, right? And kind of have that aha moment as well, right? So we're talking about it and we understand it, whether it's humor or empathy or psychological safety. How are each of you helping leaders really start to embody those particular characteristics?
That's a big question. And Sudie, you had talked about this before about being having a place at the table. And I think, Mindy, you had actually said this idea about empathy. So for me, it's always about a demonstration. How do we practice what we want? And when I'm in meetings, the thing that is really critical for me is my presence, my behaviors, my actions are supporting what I'm saying. So we have to have alignment with what I say and what I do. And at all decisions within the organization, we do kind of three things. But there's an exercise that I do with all staff and that we have our leadership teams do. It's how do you communicate with others? How do you want others to communicate with you? And what are your hot buttons? And it's typical that individuals don't want to share what we call hot buttons because they don't want folks to know the things that they can use against them. And I say, no, you're missing the point. The communication is a minefield. And I want you to know the things that you are going to say or you're going to do that are going to have a negative impact on our relationship. So I'm going to tell you that. Here's the jokes I don't like. Here's the things that I appreciate. Here's the most effective way to communicate with you or with me. And I have those folks share that back so we don't have to make certain mistakes. So that's one. The second is we do kind of an assessment on, we do personality assessment for our leadership teams. Looking at kind of 4 fun animal types: dolphins, panthers, peacocks, and owls. And when we're able to talk about that, people have sets in their minds about, well, here's what a panther is. They're always aggressive. They're always. And so I like it when folks use that word. They're always something. I said, no human being is always. We move through different personality types to try to get what we want, to try to get the outcomes that we're looking for. If you overuse a specific style, that's a detriment. So what we want to do is help folks understand that we have different personality types that we use so that we can get the outcomes that we're looking for. How do we do that? And then the other thing is we practice this idea of patience, which is very difficult often in the workplace. We want folks to know right now. We want folks to be successful now. We want folks to do the right thing right now or to do the job perfectly right now. And we say, hey, you have to be patient, which means that you have to engage your staff and helping them understand what the expectations are and what does it look like? What are your expectations? We help our leadership team understand that their staff aren't mind readers. And that is so difficult sometimes because they should know what to do. And I'm like, how would they know that? So we have those conversations out loud, and it's been very helpful.
I agree with all of that. And I love the animal reference and that we're not one thing all the time, right? And we move through that. And, I think, Russell, Mindy, Kristen, Corinne, you'll agree with me that everything is based on the trusted relationship that you have with your team, right? That you've built so you can give them that feedback and you can have the managerial courage and the courage to tell them, how they can lead differently or better and bring that inspiration or what they need to do with their teams. And that's always built on trust. So when your colleague knows, hey, Suda's telling me this because her intent is to help me be better, then everything flows okay from there, right? So, the same, I will take the feedback back from my colleagues as well on what I could do differently or better or whatever. So I think it's really based on the trusted relationship that you have to say, hey, how do you think that meeting went? Oh, I thought it was great. No, it didn't go so well. Let me tell you what I heard and saw, what other people heard and saw. You might want to, and here's how you could approach that differently. But again, it's coming from a place of positive intent, from support, so they know that my role is to help them be better leaders.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I love that. Mindy, did you have something?
I was just going to echo kind of what Suda and Russell said. I mean, when we're going back to our conversation about the basics, that trust is so important and being able to have space for each other to be human. Like, we're going to mess up and we're going to mess up together. And how do we give space to talk through that in a safe way? to acknowledge and then also like move forward, and how do we use that to become stronger and better and be able to work together in a healthier way.
Yeah.
And
I love that.
And I'll display that vulnerability as well. I'm the first to raise up my hand and saying, I'm not the most financially inclined. I can run a P&L. I've done that for, 20 years. But, I'll walk over to my CFO's office. No, I don't understand what they said in that meeting. Can you explain it to me again? Like Sesame Street it for me, and then he'll break it down Sesame Street style, and I got it, So, that's his expertise, and I will never have it fully, and he'll never have my expertise. So I'll break down things for him as well, and sharing that I think is important. I actually have a question for Russell, if I may, knowing off of a long strike. In our Manitoba province of Manitoba, that business, we had a strike, not as long as the one that you went through, and it's all resolved now. But I'm curious as what strategies you put in to build back the trust, because at the end of the day, no one was getting divorced, right? We all want to move back into the same house together, and so certainly our good faith practice of negotiation and making sure that no values were ever lost because we knew we were all moving back in the same house together. Given the length that your teams are off, how did you build that back?
That's a great question. We're in the process of building that back now. One of the things that we did while we were into it was we started talking with our staff teams about the impact. And we said, here's what we want to do as an organization. Here's what we are going to do as the leadership team. It was a week into the strike, and our senior leadership team and senior staff took 25% pay cuts. So we told folks that we were all going to be impacted. But we also didn't pretend that the salary gaps were the same. So the impacts, we said, here's what we're doing for a senior team, and then here's what we're going to start doing for those staff members who are at certain levels financially. We telescoped that, and we told folks up front. And our intention was that our staff members who were going to be impacted the most negatively because they were not making as much money as others would be the least impacted. So we told folks that. So that was one. The second, we for our staff meetings, we would talk about where we were in the strike process, how it was impacting the organization. And we started sharing information about what our spend was going forward. When would we, how are we going to have to make decisions based on what's happening with us now? And what's the time frame for us to continue that going in the future? We wrote letters. We sent human communications to our teams. I met with all the staff members who were impacted by salary decisions. And then I had honest conversations with all the team members that we did layoffs with, individually, one-on-one with all of them in New York. So New York, Canada, LA, and France. So it was just a big deal. One of the things that we heard was that, hey, I appreciate the honesty. That was great, even though the impact was negative for them. So the triage piece for us was that folks can talk about this idea of keeping it real, but what keeping it real often means for businesses, hey, we just need to know what our bottom line is. How many staff do we need to get rid of so that we can move forward? But what we were looking at is how do we keep the human focused on wanting to come back when the strike ends.
Right.
So that was key for us.
That's great. That's wonderful. Thanks for sharing that.
And how is Hollywood? How are anybody going to deal with this big, huge that vacuum that sucked all these very talented, diverse actresses and actors out of this pool? How is this going to affect us?
So the actors are going to come back. That's a passion for them. It's all of the supports, the hairdressers and the dressmakers and the grips and all those folks who are support staff. The shoe store, which was across the street from the studios, or the coffee shop, which was down the street from the studios. All of those are impacted, and so those are the payroll companies that supported the production companies. all of those downstream organizations are the ones that are negatively impacted. And we have individuals who say, I'm never going to be in that industry again, or I'm never going to be connected to something which can be impacted by a strike like that. Because it can happen every 3 years for the CBA negotiations.
Sure.
So we have people who have left our industry, entertainment payroll, which is a very niche area, who say, I'm going to just go into regular accounting, or I'm just going to go into regular payroll for ADP, because that's a constant. So it's we're not sure how it's going to impact us, but we won't know until the second quarter of 2024.
Over to you, Kristen.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. That there's so many different directions I want to go, and so many different things that are happening. You'll see me almost taking my personal notes in the comment section about the things that are standing out to me. So, it might appear that it's for the audience, but it's really my own personal tracker for what I'm walking away with.
Yeah,
And
but I
so-
appreciate that, because I'm adding those to the comments for everybody to see. I like the little synopsises after the summaries after everyone speaks.
I appreciate that. And so as we really start to think about what we're looking at for 2024, I think there's a couple of trends that we've really hit on that are really coming across as summaries for us, and some highlights that we're seeing. But there's a couple of things that I've been reading about that we haven't necessarily talked about. And before we get into our next guest, I'd really like to dive into a little bit about this concept of how are we asking people to return to work or return to the office. And I want to just spend a couple minutes here before we move on to our next guest. But what I really want to do is kind of think about, what are we hearing? What are our organizations doing? And Mindy, I'd like to start with you if you're confident enough to jump into the fray on this conversation. But what are you hearing and experiencing around this return to the office?
It's so unique for the different companies too. You see different leaders and founders that are kind of making mandates. I mean, it's still kind of a mix. I feel like it's always kind of been a mix, and it's like people trying to figure out truly what is working best for us. I think the organizations that are doing it in a really thoughtful way, in like with a human-centered design approach, where they're really going to their employees and their workforce and truly trying to understand their workforce and who are they and what are their roles and how do we work best together. And most likely it's a combination of working together in person and also being at home. A hybrid situation, I feel, is more of the preferred, if you're able to, if you're an industry, right, that can do that as well. But I think the main theme is, how are we being able to create autonomy, flexibility when possible, and also hearing from our employees and designing with them in mind.
Mm-hmm. No, those are great points. Russell, how about you? What are you hearing, and what's your experience been in this conversation?
Yeah, I think Mindy's 100% correct. That part of the idea is about the industry. We almost never have developers on site. So we don't think about their work as something that needs to be overseen or supervised at one location. And our payroll coordinators might have a whole different thought, saying, hey, I can do this. I can work remotely as well. But the team environment for them is critical to get the work done, because of how they interact. So organizations that have staff members who are spread across locations or spread across different locales may have a better opportunity to have that conversation about remote work, because their workers are already remote. Mm-hmm. What we find is that there is a control issue for some organizations, founders, presidents, CEOs, who want to see people physically on site, because they believe that that's going to either enhance a culture or that they can trust that the work is getting done. And that's the thing that I think we have, that there's some difficulty around. Why do you want them there? And then being able to articulate that in a way that is accurate and makes sense. And I put those two things together because somebody might say, hey, if we have staff together, they will work better. And then we have others who say, the 3 hours I spent commuting, I could have been working. So it's a real conversation.
Yeah, no, thank you both for that little side journey into that topic. It really is something that I think a lot of organizations and a lot of HR professionals are struggling with at really kind of articulating what those things are. So I'd like to move to our next guest, Tracy Sponenberg. Tracy is the Chief People Officer at the Granite Group and has done a number of speaking engagements as well, and has spent time with Corrine on the Progressive HR Live space. So Tracy, what are some of the things that have been happening for you since you and Corrine have talked on HR Live, Progressive HR Live?
Hi, thanks for having me, and sorry it took me a little bit to get in. Quite a bit, actually. I'm leaving the Granite Group in early January and stepping into, I guess, following somewhat Mindy's path, kind of, and stepping into fractional consulting while I build out a little bit more speaking and a little bit of advising. So that's a big change, huge change.
That is a huge change. What are some of the things you're considering when you're making that change, and what are some of the things you're driving towards in that kind of life design?
So a number of years ago, and I think a lot of people did this, right? Going through COVID, especially going through COVID as a chief people officer and for an in-person business, I really got a chance to step back and assess what I was doing, and was I happy doing what I was doing, and did I want to do this for decades more? And a lot of things happened. We had my mother passed away during COVID. We had a whole bunch of other losses and a whole bunch of changes, and I just sort of went, you know what, I want to plan my life out. And so I initially thought a few years down the road, several years down the road, actually, once all of our kids were out of school, and what would that look like? So we tried to design our life for the future, and then work backwards a bit and work toward that. And what I found out was that sounds great to be able to have some security while you build out what you want for the future, but it's really hard to be a full-time chief people officer and also build what you want for the future. So the time was right to exit within the next few weeks, and I'm scared and thrilled.
It sounds really exciting. It sounds really great. And so I'm curious as to what your areas of focus are going to be, and what HR trends you're looking at for 2024.
Sure. So three main areas: the fractional consulting, and that's going to be largely for the distribution or wholesale distribution industry. So we've done a lot of transformation work at my company, and I absolutely love it. So our industry tends to, as wonderful as it is, tends to lag behind a little bit. So that's exactly what I'll be doing with my first client. I have a long-term client that I'm super excited about, and I'm hoping to take that and go from place to place to place, and just kind of change how HR is viewed, and change, both internally and externally. And then through the second thing, which is speaking, and then through, some advisory work. So that's that. As far as trends, I used to completely reject the notion of trends. So I used to go, okay, because you go into Target and you see, at least I see, every piece of clothing that I wore in the 1990s. So I think of trends as more related to kind of fast fashion. But then this was actually not too long ago. I actually looked up the definition, which is just a change or development over time. So I was really thinking of trends as something that would come and then go pretty quickly. But I tried to flip my thinking and think of, okay, what's going to be here and then stick? And so I'm sure I couldn't catch most of the session, but I'm sure a lot of wonderful things were mentioned. But I wanted to talk about the one thing that I think affects me in particular. And there's tons. There's a lot of work that we still have to do individually and collectively. But I see a real trend toward the future being fractional, toward companies. Yeah, I knew Mindy was going to nod to that, and I knew Corinne was going to nod to that. So I see, not just in the HR space, but that's where my experience has been. I see a lot of friends and people that I know, for one reason or another, stepping out. And these people are talented as hell. And so realizing that I can step out on my own, be my own boss, and still do the work. I love the work. I never want to be a professional speaker. I love doing the work and I want to do that. But I want to do that for myself and I want to do that for working for myself. And I think that stretches beyond. And I actually hired a coach as I was thinking of stepping out. I'm so glad I did because I stepped out early. Anessa Fike, and she talks about that a lot. You know, the future is fractional, and I think the future is fractional. So you're going to see a lot of companies not having a traditional C-suite in the next few years and starting next year. So you have a CPO who works 5, 10, 20 hours a week and gives you the best of what they do, that strategic thinking, that thought partner, that thought leadership. And then there's a core team that's doing the functional work, and that can extend to marketing, to could extend to finance, could extend to sales, it could extend to all different areas. And as a fractional consultant, I will likely have, you know, more than one company as a client.
No, that's really amazing. And I'm wondering, for those of us who might remain in the core space, right? What are some of those things that we should be looking for in those fractional folks who are going to be supporting us?
You know, I think for me so far, my entry has been through CEOs. So that's something that I'd love to hear Mindy's experience in jumping through HR. But I think the way I look at that, if I were going to bring in a partner, I'd look for somebody who could fill in the gaps. And oftentimes, if you have a team that's either come up from within the company or maybe has spent their career in functional HR, like I have, it's sort of hard to pull up sometimes. And sometimes you don't know what you don't know. And I've been there in my career before. And so I think you want someone who can fill in those gaps. You want someone who can put together a people strategy, who can, you know, tell you how to connect that to the business strategy, because we see often that that's really difficult for some people. For some people, it's not, but for some people, that's really hard.
That's a great insight. And I will toss the question over to Mindy then. So Mindy, what should we be looking for if we're in the organization and we're going out and we're searching for that support?
Hi, Mindy.
Hey, Tracy. It's so good to be here, first of all. Thank you. I love that we're both like fractional people together. I'm sure Corrine had that in mind when she was thinking of her vision for this. I think when we're looking for kind of that fractional expertise, it's like, what have I not yet experienced? I often find that in the small, medium businesses I'm working in, they have young HR head of people or HR directors, and they have an executive team that may have a mix of experiences, but maybe hasn't worked with a strategic HR person, and they're about to go through something, or they're about to start to think about what's next, and that HR person is advocating for themselves. They're raising their hand and saying, hey, I need some help. And that executive team is being really thoughtful and saying, how do we augment, how do we support our person, and knowing that we can't afford, and it doesn't make sense to bring in a 20-year professional. That person probably get bored and wouldn't want it. You don't need them for 40 hours a week. And so how can we have that expertise for a fraction of the cost and a fraction of the time to help build in the expertise for our current team members? I think this is also good, and it's not just with people leaders, but it's also in our finance and marketing, and it's how, are we able to take our workforce that already we're asking them to do more with less and provide them with a resource. This really goes into also rethinking skills, and how are we thinking about developing skills and upskilling? Well, fractional workers are an incredible way to be able to bring in and provide that level of mentorship for team members, to be able to do some job shadowing even, and be able to have coaching.
That's a great.
I could keep talking, but
I'm taking offline. I'm just learning. I'm actually not doing it yet. I'm not doing it till January, so I'm just I studied up quick.
Yeah, I mean, I think fractional, it's kind of hard for people to wrap their mind around, and I still find that people have different definitions for it, because often I think depending on the industry you're working in, depending on the size of organization, your door in may look very different, and it's been really interesting to see how that door changes depending on the organization, because some may have started with a consultancy, they may have started on a project. That consultant may have put stuff into place, and now it's about what does that look like supporting this moving forward, and maybe that's subcontracting with a Mindy who's able now to kind of work several hours a month with this now intact team. It also, I have found young HR leaders advocating for themselves, saying they need help, and realizing and paying out of their own pocket to begin with, and finding me on my mentor cruise or on a mentor website, and they're thinking it's just a mentorship, and then they realize, then they're talking to their CFO about strategic, business decision making, and so then that's about how do we talk about moving this from a mentorship into what would it look like to bring me into an organization as a fractional support.
Yeah, I think there is a lot of, and I think that's great. There is a lot of confusion. How I define it, and this helps me because I didn't really know at first. Long-term, part-time. That's how I think of fractional.
Yes.
I'm your CPO, long-term, part-time. If I'm your CPO for 2 months, I'm interim, right? If I'm coming in and in between. So kind of long-term, part-time is how I define that difference. But you're right, Mindy, it's kind of all over the place.
Yeah, because it could start as your long-term part-time, and then as you get to a certain stage of growth, then you have that young HR leader in place, I often find, and they've kind of grown to a place where they can take the reins a little bit more, and then you almost go back into an advisory role where it's more on a retainer, and we're talking a couple of hours for a period of over 3 months.
Great insights. No, thank you both so much for the conversation on that. And I think we could probably go for a number of hours on the pros of this and how to make it work. So Mindy, I think then I am going to transition to you. So we talked to Tracy, who's transitioning out of a traditional head of HR role and into the space that you're in. And I know that you have been highly visible and engaged with the HR space in your role and your fractional consulting ways that you're working. So I'm curious, what have you really been focused on, or what are some of the things that you're finding your organizations are asking you about the most?
A lot of organizations are really looking at what we were talking about in the earlier session about basics, and we've been going after all the shiny objects, and now we're starting to kind of get the wheels are starting to come off, and how do we reframe and really think and go back to our why and how we articulate our why and have some foundational principles, and how do we create a really good cadence of communication? How are we making sure the right conversations are happening at the right time? How are we equipping our managers with the right capabilities and the right coaching to feel like they can be successful, often because they were promoted too early without the concept of onboarding or ramping people into new roles, because things are just been moving so quick. And so often it's kind of like help us, Mindy, kind of take a step back and really understand our current state and really create thoughtfulness and a cadence in how we do things. I also think it's about really realizing after working with me, they're like, wow, we only thought of HR as activities, and we placed HR on the island of misfit toys. And how do we build that bridge back to the business? And how do we support taking HR off that island and putting them into the strategic planning and really starting to shift from activities to the outcomes, then how they drive the strategic initiatives of the organization?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, and I think that as we think about what's coming in 2024 and we think about some of the challenges we've had over the past couple of years, that kind of back to the basics conversation, it might even help ground us as HR professionals a little bit and might actually help us, get our footing and continue to add that value. And so when you're having those conversations and you're moving into that, we've talked a little bit about either generative AI. We've talked a little bit about some of the union presence that we're seeing in different areas. Are you seeing anything specific coming up as concerns or areas of focus for those organizations from a strategic perspective?
Really getting mindful about when we're faced with this, not just making assumptions. It's about kind of how are we stepping back and remaining curious, and how do we make sure that we're talking with our employees, that we're understanding who they are, what they need, what are those moments that matter for them, and not just throwing. I often find that people are going and throwing in a tool, or let's put in this chat bot, but they're putting in the AI chat bot and then realizing, oh, well, people aren't using it because it's not giving them quality of answer. Well, that's because we don't have consistency of our process even, or a knowledge base that has the quality, consistent knowledge to feed into the chat bots. So once again, it's going back to really understanding, we need to understand what are the actual problems in order to be able to then put in right size solutions. And then how are we being able to create a good communication plan? We have been talking about communication as a theme throughout this, to be able to support the change management when we do launch a new initiative or we are iterating. And it's going to be always constant change and continuous improvement and continuous learning. So how are we putting these in thoughtfully and putting in the guardrails and building the capabilities and muscle to be able, so that change is something that we become comfortable with, because we're still really uncomfortable. And what I see is, if we aren't doing these things well, we're seeing a lot of leaves of absences. We're seeing a lot of mental health. We're seeing a lot of toxicity in the workplace, a lot of disconnection.
No, and I think it's a great call out to really identify those areas of human interaction, right? So we've talked about that a little bit as well, and the humanity, whether it's the empathy or the humor or the listening, right? It's getting back to what some of us would even describe as emotional intelligence, and leveraging that as we continue to move through some of these complicated times from an HR perspective and a business perspective, really.
Yeah. And it's so true. I very rarely see a performance discussion when we're having a performance issue with an employee that doesn't include some level of something's going on personally and it's now showing up at work. And how do we thoughtfully walk through that in a way that supports the business, but also that human in that employee?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's a muscle that I think we all have to really continue to exercise, and really be able to move forward with that. And we'll be able to kind of work through and remind ourselves and each other how that should look and what we should be doing with that. No, I love that part of the conversation. And Tracy, I'm sure that's one of the things that as you make your transition will be kind of top of mind for you, as well as bringing in that human element to those conversations.
Yeah, and I've been on the receiving end of that conversation myself, and I think, and that was due to burnout. And to Mindy's point, there's almost and it all worked out. It was a very caring conversation, and with my CEO. But there's almost always something, and often managers aren't necessarily prepared. And I know with my company, and I'm sure with Mindy's companies, and But this isn't the case in our industry. Everywhere, people are going to their managers for these kinds of things. It used to be managers, at least, and it still is in our industry a little bit, go talk to HR about anything, potentially even dealing with any kind of emotion. You frown a little bit, you get sent to HR. And that's not the way it is, right? So having managers understand, how to be a good human and how to interact with their people, and that people have lives outside of work that they do bring into work, and we have to take that into account.
Yeah, and handling that in the right way takes a skill. And we kind of got circling back into the conversation of training our managers and our leaders and getting back to those basics. So really, really great conversation.
Great conversation. I was wondering, do any of you have any questions for the audience that you'd like to ask?
I'd love to know what going into 2024, and maybe you covered this because I could only attend for part of it, but what are they most concerned about?
There is not a lot of HR, and this is again why I love the fractional model so much, is because there is not enough human resources professionals for employees. If you think about it, it used to be 1 to 100. And if you had 2 to 100, you were doing pretty good. But HR carries a lot. We carry a lot, and we have so much more expertise. And even with, the innovations and the of Gen AI, we still have a lot, and we do need more support. And so the fractional model is a great model for that, but also for the executive suite and for company CEOs to understand that you need to have more HR professionals if you are going to run a good company.
I think it's so poignant that you say that, right? You see all this research that's showing, okay, we have greater technology, but if it's not implemented in a thoughtful way, you may actually be burdening yourself and slowing you down. We have all the great technology, but yet we don't see a lot of productivity change in businesses. There's still, why is productivity flat? We should be seeing it increase, get better. With the technology advances, we should be able to do more with less in a healthy way. And we're just not seeing it. We're seeing greater unwellness, greater toxicity, greater mental health issues, and no change in productivity. And so it feels like we're burning out our people while not really even seeing a difference. So something has to give. And I would say fractional and of course other things. It's not the pill, it's not the solve all, but could be one of those ways to give room for a shift.
Yeah, exactly. Go ahead, Debbie.
Oh, I was going to ask that. It's been really wonderful watching you all as a audience member. So thank you, Corinne, first of all, for figuring out how to get me on this side of the virtual stage. I would also suggest that as an HR function, right? So if we think about what's hitting business, and we know AI is all over the place, we know, right, what's happening in global economy, we know, et cetera. Right? So we were through a seismic shift. We're still kind of feeling our way through post-pandemic. HR has not recovered from that, right? So we were already burnt out as a function. I do think the question is how are we looking at who else is providing support? And I would actually suggest a couple of things. One, I go back to managers and saying the reality is that people look to their manager most for in times of change. They look for that support, et cetera. So what are we doing to actually skill up and create capacity for managers? And I think that that's a key priority of HR. So if we can do, right, if the HR function can do that, I keep saying I'm no longer there, but if HR can do that, that's a strategic lever that I think that is best for the organization. So what you were describing that's poor change management. It's not having change management adoption. And so I'm saying, so who's actually looking at this systemically, and how are we really rolling things out in the right way and making sure we're getting adoption? So I do think that is also another place. Often, change management support sits in HR, and when it does, so how are we looking at that piece and not just putting change on top of change? So regulate, trying to manage and navigate the change and make sure it's sticking, et cetera. So and then the other thing is, so for example, with AI, the company I was last with, where I was a CTO, is looking to say, how can we bring in generative AI and actually support our frontline managers, right? So how are we looking at that intersection of AI and, just-in-time pragmatic coaching, or just-in-time policy review, or just-in-time, et cetera, opportunities. So I think there's wonderful spaces with HR and AI and managers that we can actually look at and really accelerate that can help, again, manager capability and capacity. So I would say, okay, what's after that, right? So I would challenge us to think more systemically and say, what big levers do we have? And I think we are appropriately positioned to do that. So my thoughts on the burnout piece, and also just can't forget about managers, and what are we doing to really care and feed for managers? Because HR will never get enough people, will never get enough support. But if we can partner and make our managers as effective as we can, that's got great dividends.
And they're burned out too, right? And they're burned out too.
100%. Yeah.
I think everybody gets burned out, which kind of leads me into talking about the 5-day work week and the 40-hour work week. But we're not going to go down that rabbit hole today. With talking about technology, I wanted to bring up Tim's response to our question and his question. So what keeps me up at night? Are we going to fall behind, so far behind with our technologies and processes that it's impossible to catch up? I think that is a very insightful what keeps you up at night, Tim. And I had not thought about that. But yeah, that is very, very real. Very, very real.
And yes, we are, maybe. Like, we probably are. There is so much out there. So much out there. And are we going to fall behind? Probably. But I think we've talked about throughout this, like, keep your focus on what's really important, right? And don't go for I love bright, shiny objects. I really do. But don't just go for the bright, shiny objects. Try to solve a problem. And we've been guilty of this. We did this at my company, implemented a really cool solution that nobody used. And we tested it. We tested it with too small of a group. But it's really going to solve a problem, and people have to use it. We had to scale back on our team because we were just throwing too many apps at people. And you have to look at not just what's in the market, but what's right for your company and what's right for your people. And is technology the solution? Is technology the solution? And I think with more and more generative AI, these solutions over the next few years are going to get easier and easier. While I'm leaving, I talked to my VP and was like, just don't add anything new in 2024. I'm sorry for anybody who's watching, who's in technology, like, don't do it in 2024. It's going to change and get better. Look at it. But wait.
The only thing I'd add there too is to the question from Tim is, if you have like an agile mindset about an iterative approach of continuous improvement, and as you think about your processes and your initiatives, always making sure, like, how are you measuring success of those initiatives? Do you have like baseline targets? Are you keeping an eye on how they're shifting or not? And always taking in a retrospective. How are you getting input from the employees, and do you have a regular cadence of holding a retrospective to always be asking yourself, is this still serving our organization? Is this still serving the employees? And if it's not, what are those micro changes that we can introduce over the course of a time period? So you're not dropping large slices of value and change, but you're almost like micro dosing change along the life cycle.
I'm going to use that. I love that. Microdosing change.
That is a good one.
Really a good way to put it. And on that note, I have to hop off, but this was really great, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Tracy.
Bye.
Bye. All right. So with that, we're going to introduce our next guest, Debbie Plager of the Plager Group. And Debbie, we're going to put you on the spotlight here. Let us know, like, what's changed since you were on the live last. And it hasn't been that long, but I think with the time that goes so fast now, a lot must have changed.
I I was thinking about that, right? And I think it was June. And so I was just a couple months into being a solopreneur. So I guess I can say, hey, I've survived the first 6 months. I'm about 8 months in. We were joking with the audience when I talked about my tagline of, insight, intention, and impact. Is it the triple I? Is it 3 I's? Still haven't figured that out. Kareen, sorry about that. But I think
No worries.
the big thing is, I think with anybody doing this journey, my word for the year was open. And I'm glad I did that because I got to experiment with, what is the type of work that I thought I came in with a thesis, right? That there are these 3 areas and this is what I'm going to do. And let me try to, further clarify. And I found more and more what was the work that I was really enjoying and what were the type of clients that I was looking to do the work with. So I think that's further clarity that just comes with time. That's one thing. And then 2, something where I had a passion project of something I really wanted to do for over 10 years, which I can talk a little about if we have time, is now something that I'm actually bringing to light in 2024. And not only am I bringing it to light, and I'm actually looking at it being part of my business. So I think it's paying attention to those things that you've had on your back burner for years, or things that you've really loved to do or wanted to do, and see, as you learn more about the market and what's out there, is how does it really tie into your core competency and looking what to do. So for me, Sojourn Executive Women Retreats, I've been wanting to run a multi-day retreat or offsite for several years and just didn't do it on the side. Probably because I wasn't fractional, or I wasn't part-time, or I wasn't a solopreneur. And to now be able to do that, and to also understand the need out there and say, wait a minute, this is more than just a one-time thing. I think that's a huge learning.
Okay, I was just switching us around. Yeah, Mindy had to go. Mindy had to jump off. So,
okay.
So, and you just talked about what it is that you want to do, what has changed, and what you want to do new in 2024, which is the retreats. Mm-hmm. So, kind of let us know, what's your trend? And I think I know what this one is, or I think I can guess because we've been talking about it a bit. So, what's your trend for 2024?
Oh, okay. So I kind of have 2, but I think it is partly when I think about, so if AI is clearly here and it's a disruptor, and I answer this, it's interesting, Kareen, I answer this, Kristen, you may not know this, I'm a former historian. So I'm going to answer it both as an HR executive and as a historian who looks at, like, I'm used to looking at macro trends and macro change seismic events. So we have a seismic event coming, or actually here, right, with AI. And so the stats are clear, right? So the Department of Labor says, hey, we're going to lose 13 million jobs over the next several years due to AI. We're going to gain 18 million. How on earth do we navigate that shift? How do we upskill? What is HR's role? So I do think the convergence there, but I think it comes back to, how are we preparing leaders and preparing people to be uncomfortable in the uncomfortable? Because we don't know what tech is going to be like in 3 months from now. We don't know what tech is going to be like 6 months from now. What we have to get clearer on is, but how do we work with people? When those things change, how do we continue to work with people? What's important? Can we get ahead and start to see, like, hey, these capabilities are more and more important. The emotional intelligence that people were talking about. How managers relate to people, how we relate to each other. So the work and how we do our work may change, but if we are continually in community and working with people fractionally, full-time, gig, part-time, it requires the human connections to be stronger and more resilient and more flexible. So I think about, what is HR space in that ahead and preparing the organization. So we have to look at ourselves first and saying, how is HR becoming more agile? How is HR becoming more flexible? How is HR becoming more comfortable with the uncomfortable? And then how are we leading and role modeling and supporting the way for the organization? So I might be with everybody else because I've only joined in for the last, 40 minutes or so. I think it's the convergence of those 2. And then I do think, particularly around just that role of manager, and just saying, I think the trend is, how do we really double down and support people leading differently And that really, for me, the place I start is like the executive team, right? So how is the executive team leading differently? How is the executive team leading more vulnerably? How is the executive team getting more comfortable with uncomfortable and not having all the information? But I think that does throughout the organization. So I don't have anything that's more earth shattering than that, Kareen. I don't know if I'm guessing that I am just adding another one. And she's like, oh, and someone else for AI.
Well,
I think it's a systemic thing is what I would say.
I think it's all earth shattering. I think that to Tracy's point, we haven't really necessarily paid that much attention to trends because of, every year every company puts out like Mercer and McKinsey and AIHR, and they put out trends reports, and we kind of look at them and we say, seems like it was last year. But this year, I do believe is completely different because there's lots of different things that are completely and 100% new or have like this more human focus to it. Yeah. We've always said that we need to support managers, especially middle managers, but I think there's just a renewed focus on supporting middle managers, huge on technology, especially Gen AI and what's going to happen over the next 3 months, as we say, and burnout, HR for HR. So that's been like our trends that's been going through, and organizational development. Okay, so I have to say this. I think this is like the VIP of our conversation: microdosing change. Kristen has commented about it. Tim's comment about it. Jennifer's comment about it. So
create a hashtag. I mean,
yeah, we got a hashtag going here. So we need to be more informed and more involved. And I think we could all agree with that. Mm-hmm. Kristen, what's new with you since the last time you were on the live, which was, oh golly, over a year?
Yeah, I was going to say it's been a while, so there's a lot that's changed. So as you mentioned, I am now working for the Manpower Group and learning a whole new industry. So that for me is really interesting to be part of an organization that does their own research on these types of trends, right? And puts out their own publications. And so that part has been really interesting. I think that for me as well, really getting back into what I'll call the HR business partner space, right? So, really just supporting a group of leaders, but also supporting some pretty large change initiatives in the organization. And man, do I really hope I can wrap my arms around microdosing change in 2024, because that's going to be key, I think, instead of the big bang that typically organizations take on in large scale transformations. And so I think for me, really being able to wrap my arms around some of these new conversations and not be pulled back into older ways of working and older ways of thinking for myself is going to be really, really important. And I'm loving this conversation around the leadership and the manager development and the manager support, because I think if there's someone that we can focus on in 2024, being able to focus on that manager piece is going to be really, really important, and really helping that group wrap their arms around their new ways of working and their new ways of supporting employee well-being and employee development with, things like limited budgets and all of those types of things, where the manager becomes that really that go-to person, and we're asking a lot of them that we haven't necessarily asked them to do before. And, as the concept I'm wrapping my head around from earlier in the conversation is seeing those frontline managers as an extension of human resources and as an extension of that people and culture space. And even to the part of, being able to operate in an organization as fractional HR for the frontline leadership group, right? So kind of playing it a little bit deeper into the organization. So that's where my head has even been spinning in the last 45 minutes or so.
Kristen, I think something that I love that point of like, how do we support managers? And you said, I got to remember microdosing of change. I think the piece, it was also interesting. So whether it is coming from an agile perspective or design thinking, I think this piece is right. It's all about test and learn. And what are those smaller pieces in service of, right? And I think if we can, if I were still in an organization and I'm thinking about, all right, how do I help build up my managers? How do I bring a design thinking lens? How do I help them say, like, what is a small piece that I can do? I'm going to test and learn, and it's okay if something doesn't work out because I'm learning from it. It builds my capability to take on more change. So I think it's like starting with like, what's the key muscle? You're going to be giving them a lot of change. So it's almost like upfront, just thinking about what might I want to do first that sets the stage for all this development that we need them to go through, and having them be partners in that. And also, I'm a big believer again in design thinking, or again, agile, or whichever methodology you want to use, because it puts them in the center, puts them in the action and saying, okay, manager, what are your pain points? Let's start with something that's a pain point for you and have you experience this and see how it works. So anyway, just food for thought, because I think it helps with culture. It helps with capacity, all these things.
And Debbie, what I love about that conversation is that it goes back to this idea that we've tried to integrate with folks around this growth mindset, right? And so we've pulled that forward and pulling this design thinking piece forward and really being able to, whether again, I grew up in a manufacturing environment, right? So we called it continuous improvement. We called it Lean Six Sigma, whatever your vocabulary is around it, is that we're going to get something that is close, but we don't have to wait until it's perfect. And we're going to be vulnerable enough with the organization to say, here is what it is. And we know it's not perfect. Please find the ways in which it's not perfect and it's not 100% supporting what you asked us for. And then let's redesign and reintroduce. And I think that it's also one of the things that's been the most challenging for my team to kind of wrap their arms around. I'm really working. I had a mentor, someone that I worked with previously at Harley Davidson, who really kind of drilled in that progress versus perfection mindset. And really that concept of saying, we are never going to be 100% right. And I think it ties back to what we've just been talking about. Technology is always going to change. The human condition, we all know from the past 3 years, is always going to change. We are always going to have business ups and downs. And so all of these things and all of this uncertainty doing really helps us say, we have something for the right now. And it might not be 100%, but let's build the rest of it together. And then as we evolve and we continue to talk about it in an evolutionary way, it does, to your point, it starts to drop those microdoses of saying, we are always going to evolve. We are always going to get better. We are always going to continue to learn. And I go back even to, my college days when we talked about a learning organization, right? And so you start to tie all these concepts together. It's the old is new again and all of these things, right? But you really do start to think about those things and saying, yeah, this is how it all comes to life, right? This is how it's all not theory anymore.
Yeah. It kind of reminds me of when I would talk with some of my clients, internally or externally about org design. And I said, my favorite thing is the 70-100 rule. And they're like, what is that? And I was like, we got 70% of the design figured out, but we're 100% aligned as a leadership team, because the amount of time and effort it's going to take us to get from 70 to 80 or 80 to 100, the business needs are going to change. Something else is going to break. So let's go in and be committed to learning. We'll get it up faster. We'll learn and we'll get better results more quickly. So I think I love the tie to growth mindset. I love how I think this frame of, again, whether it's TQM, whether it's Six Sigma, whether it's design thinking or agile, it creates the playbook where learning organization, growth mindset actually comes to life, right?
Excuse me, I have some guests who have shown up this is the challenge of working in an office environment, but I have Santa Claus and Elf from the movie who have stopped by my office to visit. And I believe that.
Oh, sure you do.
Yeah, come on. Yeah, now you have to, right? So wave to the people. You're on a LinkedIn Live. Everybody say hi. Yep. So this is the holiday here at Manpower Group.
Thanks for letting me.
Please.
I'm glad you're being nice.
Absolutely.
You're on the nice list, Kristen.
Can we microdose this change the elf? I love that.
Microdosing change. That's what this is microdosing change. Absolutely. And so I think that that's part of the evolution of what we're doing from an HR perspective is going back to basics, right? You don't get more basic than Santa and elf. You don't get more basic than that.
The things I missed out on my own, right?
I'm working on recovery here. I don't even know where to go from that.
Well, I don't know if you saw that you were talking about something, and by far it was not funny. It was very interesting, and I smiled really big because I saw Santa go by in the mirror or in the window, and I was like, "Oh my gosh!" And I was like, "Make attention," and then they show up your office. Oh my goodness!
And this is why some of that, solarpreneurship, Debbie. I'm sorry, you don't have Santa or elf. I don't know what to say.
You can where's the photobombing opportunity? Oh,
yes. No, I was hoping that they would sing something.
Next time, we're really going to have to ramp them up. So Corinne will pick the date next year. We might lead with them next year.
Progress, not perfection, Kristen.
Exactly. Exactly.
Nothing like that. Talk about audience participation.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah. So yeah, speaking of audience participation, I wanted to go really quickly because Jennifer had answered us and said fractional HR in 2024, hoping this at all levels and not just CHRO and executive. So I think that's a big idea. So thanks, Jennifer. And so with that, we're going to kind of wind down here and just some real quick housekeeping end of the year items. So Progressive HR Live is back in January with our January guest, Tim Whitley. Tim's been on the live for the whole 2 hours today. So thank you, Tim. Tim's a director of HR technology with Oklahoma State University, and he's also the HR tech wizard. So we're going to be starting off January strong with the HR tech wizard. And then I wanted to say thank you so much to the audience for joining us today. And thank you so much to my guests, all 10 of you. You were fantastic and so much great conversation. I really appreciate you. And I want to say happy holidays to everybody. And if we don't talk until the new year, then have a wonderful new year as well. Kristen, Debbie, anything you want to say to our audience as we wrap up?
I just want to say for those of you that are thinking about whether it's fractional, whether you're like me and ready to take the leap and become a solopreneur, to believe in yourself and what happens when you take a growth mindset, right? So when you have beliefs, instead of going from a mindset of scarcity, thinking about a mindset of abundance of what is possible. So I would just say, pay attention to what you love, pay attention to the need out there, right? There's that Ikigai Venn diagram. What do you love? What are you good at? What the world needs, what they'll pay for. And I think that there are so many people, clearly, if you are part of the Progressive HR Live audience, you have so many talents and skill sets out there. And that if you've been thinking about it, it's probably worth time to consider what might be a step to exploring that. So that's from the solopreneurship world. That's something I'll just put out there.
Thanks, Debbie. I love that. Yeah, no, I'm like, there's many people out there that have something to give, something that people are going to be worth paying for, whether that's product or service or expertise. And just to your point, go for it. It's, whatever you're passionate about. Kristen, any thoughts? Last thoughts?
I'm really looking forward to 365 days from now when we come back and look at how true were our predictions. I think that there are great opportunities for the conversation to continue, even based on the people who have joined in and been able to comment. And if you're watching this in recording, Corinne, I don't know if you're putting it out there in bits and pieces, but we'd love to be able to continue this conversation and hear what you believe your trends are for 2024 and what your key learnings have been from 2023.
Oh, that's a great question. I think I'm going to do a post on that tomorrow. So
great.
Yeah. And audience too, this live goes on replay for about a week, 2 weeks. If you think that there's somebody in your network that would benefit from our conversation or wants to share their thoughts, please go ahead and share the link to this live with them. And again, this live will be running on replay for about 1 to 2 weeks. And then, as Kristen said, I'm going to clip it up and do some fun stuff and have Santa and the elf and see where we go from there. So this conversation is just not happening once. You'll see it over the next month, and it'll be in the newsletter as well. So really appreciate everybody. Thank you so very much. One last comment from Debbie: double down on how teams work together, how to support and navigate through change. 100%. All right, everybody. Thank you so much. Have a very happy holiday. Have a very happy new year. Thank you, resourceful humans. And we'll see you in 2024.